So today we're going to talk about the different strategies that companies can use when it comes to the product mix. And there's some specific vocabulary here, but also just a reminder of how we thought about the consistency. So the first example is that I can add width. What that means, and we call that stretching. What I mean by stretching is we could add a different product line entirely. So this is an example from a few years ago, but McDonald's added the cafe products line, the McCafe. That was a pretty significant investment on their part. They stretched their product line to include espresso cafe type of drinks, pastries that they didn't offer before, that sort of thing. And really what you want to think about are the advantages and disadvantages, or pros and cons of these choices. The pro is that this created an entirely new market and added a lot of revenue. McDonald's had coffee, but they didn't have these types of drinks before and these types of pastries. And it gave them a pretty significant boost to their revenue, at least in the short run. Of course, the con is that it may be a little bit difficult to add an entire width in terms of the consistency. Okay, so we're going to go back a couple of slides here. Some of those questions McDonald's asked themselves, could they be produced on the same production equipment? No, they had to invest heavily into things like espresso machines, the ice chill machines for their iced coffee and stuff like that. They could be sold through the same place and similar, but not exactly the same supplies. Similar, but not exactly the same use of customers. In other words, people come in now just for those drinks, just for breakfast more often than they did. So it was a pretty significant investment. Was it consistent? For the most part, yes, but there were questions about whether it would be successful. And this is one of the risks that companies take when they stretch. They are usually taking on a significantly new business arena. They expose themselves to more competitors. So now McDonald's is seen competing much more directly with places like Starbucks and Tim Hortons. So now, they've kind of upset the balance by adding this. But ultimately, it can be very rewarding if it works well. Thinking of other examples where maybe it didn't work well. That's a good question. What do you think? Get you to do the work. Can you think of an example where that didn't work well? An entire product line didn't take off. Could say something like if BMW decided to start producing clothing lines for sale. Might not work really well because it's significantly different. If a company decides to add more length by creating a new product in the product line, that would be considered filling. Okay, so when they first added breakfast burritos to their breakfast menu, or when they first added the McGriddle to their breakfast menu, which I remember. I know you guys probably don't, but it wasn't quite that long ago that they decided to add the McGriddle. Essentially, it wasn't as hard. And it wasn't as challenging in terms of consistency, because really it's basically the same stuff. It's the same type of thing, and maybe they have to get new ingredients. Maybe they have to do a little bit more of an investment, but probably not significantly different. For example, McDonald's added spaghetti once upon a time. You could get mixed spaghetti. That wasn't huge investment because they did have to add some new equipment to their kitchen, but it wasn't significant. They weren't adding all sorts of different things. Just to give an example of length filling. Variations, well, you add depth by creating new variants to existing products. So when McDonald's adds a new supersize to their drinks and fries, that was a variation. When Coca-Cola created a 3-liter bottle, which I think is still available in the States, that was a new variation. And that is very easy to do. It really is not much new. You might be adding a slight variation of size, or maybe adding a different flavoring or something like the chicken McMuffin that McDonald's just added. But The problem, of course, is that it's going to cannibalize sales. In other words, people who were going to get the 2-liter Coke are now getting the 3-liter. People who were going to get the sausage and egg McMuffin are now getting the chicken McMuffin. So you're appealing to people. You're perhaps building a lot of more loyalty for people by having those varieties. But ultimately, you're not probably adding a whole lot of a whole lot of revenue from those products. And oftentimes, variations are done more to try to fill in the gaps. My customers are offering something that I am not. Think back to that competitive grid that you drew up. So Popeyes is offering the chicken. McDonald's decides it needs to offer a breakfast chicken to kind of compete with it. Or Coke adds the 3-liter, so Pepsi adds the 3-liter. That would be an example of Pepsi creating a variation, basically just to match what their competitors are doing. So variations, very easy to do, but not necessarily going to give you much in terms of extra revenue. Stretching, much more difficult when it comes to integrating with your marketing mix, being consistent, but a potential for whole new revenue, whole new markets. Filling falls somewhere in between. If Coke decides to add an energy drink to its mix, for example, it's probably going to get a boost in sales. It also may cannibalize some of its sales from other products. So it's sort of a mix between the other two in terms of the pros and cons. The last one is not an easy one to do, but companies do it frequently, and that's to prune, just like you would a tree, to cut off product lines or variations or products that are inefficient, that aren't selling well. Some fairly massive ones, car companies are a good example. GM a few years ago decided to stop its Pontiac line because essentially the Pontiac line was duplicating other GM models, other GM cars. And so there was no need to continue to produce it. It just wasn't profitable to do so. The pro, of course, of pruning is that you save money and it really streamlines your operations. Eliminating variations is not bad because it makes it easier to produce. However, the con is you can lose customers, and we saw that with the new Coke debacle when Coke decided to prune Coke Classic from its line to introduce new Coke. It really upset a lot of customers. You can see McDonald's doing this frequently because they frequently introduce variations or new products to try to get a bit of a leg up on their competition. So they're a really good example. Arch Deluxe, McDLT. You probably never heard of these, but these were burgers that came in. They were essentially hamburgers, but there was something different. The Arch Deluxe was more of an adult hamburger, whatever that means. The McDLT was a burger that you split in half. It came to you in two different halves of a box. One was cold, one was hot, and then you combined it at the last second. It was as stupid as it sounds. So these were products that they put out, but ultimately decided to prune because they just weren't doing well. And that is part of what a business has to do. It's a hard decision because you don't want to lose customers, but you also don't want to bleed money off when you don't need to. So what I'm going to ask you to do is revisit the marketing mix that you already did and suggest a couple of ways that the company that you chose may decide to add width, length, depth, and whether you think that would be a good consistent mix for them.